Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do my, what would it be? November wrap up. We're still in November. It's the last day. I ended up reading a total of 9 books in November, and that was 4 physical books, 2 ebooks and 3 audiobooks. In terms of where I got them, 1 of them I borrowed off a friend, 3 of them I got from my physical library, and 5 of them I got via Libby as well. The first book that I ended up finishing this month was The Truth of the Divine by Lindsay Ellis. This is like a sci-fi first contact book, and it's the sequel to Axiom's End, which I read a little bit earlier on in this year. We're in 2008, we're following Cora, who is in her early 20s, she's a college dropout, and in the first book she just has this terrible day at work. There's been these meteorite objects coming through the sky. There's one that happens during her workday. She gets really freaked out. She comes home, and then that day she more or less also finds an alien in her house. Just no one's doing it like her. So that's the setup for the first book, which is very much more like a fun romp. Her dad is also a total jerk. He's a very Edward Snowden type character, but also awful is important to point out. And he had, when the first meteor strike had happened, had leaked a government memo about aliens as well, just to make this whole thing more complicated. So she gets wrapped up in government stuff, alien stuff, she acts as a human alien translator, etc, etc. In this book, which is obviously the sequel, it is a very different vibe to the first book. The author does warn about it in a little introduction and goes through some trigger warnings. Basically, because of the events of the first book, Cora and a lot of the other characters that we follow are very traumatized, which is absolutely understandable. A lot of characters in this book are struggling with their mental health, and I do think that is done in a way that is accurate and appropriate and with thought and things like that, but it does mean that it's a very different book to read, because you are spending a lot of time in Cora's head, and Cora's head's not a great place to be because of that. There is also a lot of conversations that are going on in this book around intelligent extraterrestrial life and what rights they may or may not have, which as you can imagine, that conversation happening in the US in 2008. Fun time! So yeah, it's a bit more about the political scene in this book. Yeah, we have some new characters, we have some new things going on. It did feel like a second book in a series, I will say. It did feel like we had to get to a certain place with these characters to set up for the third book. But that doesn't mean that this wasn't an interesting story. I just don't think it could have stood alone as much as other stories that are, a sequel or anything like that. There were some moments in this book where I had to really be I do believe that sexual attraction is a real thing that exists, to believe what was happening in this book. But I am still interested in this series. I do feel like this was a weaker installment overall, and I do feel some of the plot points that I was really interested in the first book weren't really brought up in a way that I wanted them to in this book. But I think that I've also just fixated on a very small part of the first book and feel like everyone needs to know about it. But yeah, overall, I would say that I had a good time. I listened to this by an audiobook. I still think that the audiobook is done very well, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. The second book that I ended up reading this month was the Geographers Map to Romance by India Holton. This is the second book in the, what's it called, Love's Academic series. They're interconnected standalones, as the folks like to say. These are a series of alternate history, Victorian-y, fantasy romance books. And when I say romance, I do mean very rom-com-y. In this one, we follow our 2 main characters, Professor Elodie Tarrant and Professor Gabriel Tarrant. And the setup here is these 2 have been interested and obsessed with each other, like, from their first days of university. Basically, at one point, Gabriel is complaining that he is trying to rent some rooms, but the landlady will only rent them to a married couple. Elodie overhears, offers to marry him. Elodie is kind of wanting to do this because, you know, of the being obsessed with him, but also wanting to have a bit more recognition if she is a married female professor rather than an unmarried female professor. So yeah, they go ahead, they get married, they have like a whirlwind wedding night, and then they go to these rooms that Gabriel's trying to rent, and the landlady has let them to someone else. And in the aftermath of that, some things get said, there's some miscommunication, and they have parted ways and are trying their best to like never speak to each other, never see each other again. So what happens when the Home Office, the government, calls for a Professor Tarrant to head to Wales to help out with a magical geological phenomenon that's happening, and they both turn up. So yeah, like the first book, this is incredibly silly. It's meant to be funny. You do have to deal with a level of straight person issues, but like, it's a fun romp in a very real way. I do think that the characters and the level of humour did work for me a little bit better in this book. Elodie is very like whimsical and like a bit like head in the air, but has a real innate kind of talent for magic and for thinking outside the box in ways that always work. Whereas Gabriel is very like straight-laced, quiet, stoic, in my opinion, autistically coded. And I do think that their relationship did come across as very strong and believable. Again, it was a thing of like, I don't believe that people who feel sexual attraction are thinking about sex the entire time, but I guess I just gotta go with it. But like, overall, a fun time, but I don't think it's a great book or anything like that. I just think it's a really fun time. There are obviously, from the implication, there are quite a few sex scenes in this book. But yeah, overall I gave this 3 stars as well. The next book that I picked up was The Red Scholar's Wake by Aliette de Bodard. I went into the library, I was picking up a book that I had reserved from the library. I also saw that they had this, which is a book that I had been vaguely interested in, and I had to pick it up as well. This is like a sci-fi pirate lesbian romance book. We are following our 2 main characters, Zishi, who is like a bot maker and a mother, and she ends up getting captured by some space pirates. She's not happy with this situation, and our other character, Ricefish, is the sentient ship that Zishi has been captured on, and she was previously married to the Red Scholar, who was the head of one of the banners that these space pirates like make up. So Ricefish, as this like widowed, is trying to get control of the Red Banner. She ends up striking a deal with Zishi in the way that she's going to offer her protection, and is asking Zishi to like investigate into her, you know, wife's death, and kind of things get a bit more complicated from there. There's obviously some politics going on. There's a romance happening. I really enjoyed the like setting for this. We're in obviously a sci-fi space setting, but it's very like Southeast Asian, Vietnamese inspired, which I always think is really fun, and it's a different thing from very Western, American, English, you know, themed space book. I really enjoy sentient spaceship content in a real way. I love ideas about personhood and like consciousness in sci-fi books, and I felt like she was done really well and interestingly. There's like holograms, but also bots that make up her body. Hot. Yeah, it wasn't anything that blew me away. I did feel like the romance was pretty cute, but yeah, it was just like a fun time. It's pretty short, and I ended up giving this 3 stars as well. The next book that I ended up reading was Reborn by Seth Haddon. This is another one where it's the second book in a series, but they are kind of interconnected standalones type thing. So it's set in the same world and kind of follows on from the events of Reforged, which I read earlier this year, and I thought that book was just okay, and this one was a great time. This book we're mainly in the Resman Empire, which is, so in the first book we're mainly in Usleth, which is another kingdom which borders on the Resman Empire. And we're following two characters. We're following Izria Dziovic, who is the Strix, or like a head priest slash prophet for the Emperor in the Resman Empire, as well as Oren Radek, who is a trader and a minor character in the previous book, who normally lives in Usleth, and basically following kind of the events of the first book and following on from that. There's previously been a level of animosity and war between the Resman Empire and Usleth, but the Empire has stopped being as, expansive and colonial, and there has been a peace, and we are trying to sort out like trade agreements between these two countries. So Oren is going to the Resman Empire very much on a mission of forming some kind of trade relations and kind of being the first one to do that so that he gets a good share of the profits. However, when they arrive there, things are not as they would expect. The Emperor does not want to see them, and yeah, things have changed. Isra is also a bit more aware of the political situation and is trying to work out a bit of what's going on. They end up having to kind of team up to work out what's happening. A little bit of, similar to the first book, a coup storyline going on. I do think that the relationship setup in this is insane and made me feel crazy, because Isra is, with being kind of his role, he is religious. He's a follower of one of these gods called Sorduni, who is the god of fate, and he knows that Oren is like his fated man. He has had dreams of this person. He is like all in on this relationship from the very beginning, from when they first meet. Whereas Oren Radek is here like, I'm here to make good platonic relationships so I can further my trade empire, which is so funny, I have to point out. Like, it is to the point of like farcical at some points, but like absolutely hysterical. I really enjoyed them as characters in the first book because we were in Usleth. Usleth doesn't have religion or gods. They do some weird things with, dead corpses of ancient extinct beasts. Don't worry about it. But obviously the Resman Empire does have various gods, so and because of Isra's place as well as being someone who is religious in this world, we learn a lot more about the religion. Awesome, great, love that for me. Oren is also this very like dandy-esque character with some self-worth issues. I love that. Whereas Isra is kind of the more tall, stoic character, as they often are. But yeah, I just had a absolutely great time with this. I had such a fun time. I thought that this was really fun. I do have some issues with it. I don't think it's a perfect book. I do feel like it was annoying to have a very similar plot going on in this book to the first book, and with both of these books, I do feel like all the plot gets resolved very quickly in like the last 2 to 3 chapters, and then we get a tiny epilogue, and that's not really what I'm interested in when I'm reading a book. I want a bit of a longer resolution. I want to spend more time with these characters, like, afterwards as well. So that was a bit frustrating. Yeah, overall, I had a great time. This was a lot of fun. I ended up giving this 4 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Most Ardently by Gabe called Novoa, this is like a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but where Elizabeth is a gay trans man called Oliver. It's part of like a collection of these like remix classics, which the idea is to kind of retell these classics in a way that have more diverse characters. I think they're also all made to be young adult. I've only read this one, so I can't be sure, but like, I'll explain my thoughts a little bit later. But yeah, they're older, they're like 17, 18 in this book. So yeah, it basically follows the story of Pride and Prejudice, except we have some extra bits because Oliver is often dressing up as a boy, leaving and meeting up with these characters in outside situations as they wouldn't happen in the original book, he is like not out to anyone apart from like Jane. So a lot of this book, he is dealing with a lot of dysphoria and like dead naming and misgendering at home and in like society as well. But yeah, I felt like it was very cute. It, you know, did what is set out to do. I like some of the changes. I thought they were interesting. In a place sometimes a little bit unrealistic, but we did have like a cute happy ending at the end, and I think that's what we were going for, you know? And yeah, I do feel like a lot of the historical information like did track. I just felt like the way that that was done was often very telly, because as you can imagine, this is a book that is written for a modern audience who do not know the intricacies of, you know, the Regency era, whereas when Jane Austen was writing her book, she just did not explain things because they did not need to be explained. You can do a Pride and Prejudice retelling without it being so telly. One of my friends and mutuals has done a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but from Darcy and Bingley's perspective, and it felt a lot more accurate to how the original was written and in that style of Regency works. So I do feel like this is just because it's a book written for a modern audience, especially like maybe a younger audience, that they felt like it needed to be explained to that audience. I did feel like this was less of an issue the more of this book that I read, but definitely to begin with, I was like, ooh, this is very telly as a writing style. I don't love this. My other thing was, as I mentioned, this is YA. I did feel like at certain points the author was really constricted by the fact that this was a YA book. One of the places that we go with Oliver as a boy is to like a Molly house, but for young people specifically. And it's like, did they not let you write an adult man? You know? I think you should have been able to just write this as the ages that they are in you know, as adults within this world, and it would be fine. You know, it was very like, can we get him out of there? Overall, this was very cute. I would say that if I'd read this when I was a teenager, I think I would have been obsessed with it, considering the fact that I was already obsessed with Pride and Prejudice as a teenager. I think this would have like been really important to me at that time, but reading it as a bit more of an adult would have wanted something that was a bit more age accurate, basically. Which is why I'm probably going to, you know, continue to pick up KJ Charles books, because that's probably going to be a bit more appropriate for the type of things that I'm reading at the moment. But yeah, overall, cute. I gave this 3 stars. Caveats in that it's definitely meant for a younger audience. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This is like a historical horror book. We're in like a post-interwar type period. We're following our main character Jane, who both of her parents died, and she ended up being taken in by like a family in the village that she was in when her parents died. They are planning to move to a different city, and she's like, her inheritance isn't really going to stretch for the change in like money that she's going to have to spend. So she is desperately trying to like scientifically, mathematically work out who is the perfect man that she's going to marry. And she ends up deciding on the local doctor called Augustine Lawrence to kind of get married, who like eventually does agree to marry her on the basis that she can help with the basics of surgery. She's also agreed to do all of his like bookkeeping, because she is like self-trained as an accountant, and that she is never going to sleep at his weird crumbling mansion out in the countryside. She can sleep in the medical surgery like itself, basically. So obviously the like night that they get married, she has to end up sleeping at this house, and then there's a big storm and she can't leave for a couple of days. And obviously at that point things get a little bit weirder, they get a little bit ghostly, get a little bit more spooky. So yeah, it kind of goes on from there. I did really enjoy the discussions about surgery that were going on in this book, because of the time period where like pre-anesthesia, early anesthetic surgery, which is, I think, a period of medical history that is very interesting. I do enjoy medical history. I am in the medical field, so I thought that stuff was all really fun. I similarly enjoyed the discussions that were being had about ghosts and kind of spiritualism and stuff like that in this book. I thought that the setting was really fun and a great time. I did enjoy the characters. Jane is, again, a character who, in my opinion, is quite autistically coded, and it is always fun to have a heroine that is very, like, factsy based, even though that does change over the course of the book with kind of what's going on. And I liked the relationship that was built up between Jane and Augustine, and I felt like that was very successfully done in a short period of time before obviously things kind of fall apart. My main issue is that I didn't find this book personally very scary. It is more of a creeping psychological type horror thing that's going on. And yeah, I don't know if part of that was because obviously some of the like medical stuff is meant to be like gross and like, you know, body horror-y, and I just thought it was fun and interesting because of the way that I am. But yeah, this didn't work for me in terms as much of as a horror and making me feel scared, but I did still think that it was very well done and I had a good time with it, and I liked some of the conversations that were being had. So overall, I did give this 3 stars as well. Very 3-star heavy month, I've gotta say. The next book that I ended up reading was The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. This is a fantasy story. We are following our main character, Dr. Walden. She is a teacher in her like mid to late 30s. She teaches mainly invocation at a like specialized private boarding school in like Hertfordshire, as well as having this like deputy head level role of being like the director of magic. And so one of her jobs is all of the paperwork that is involved with safety checklists and making sure that all these teenagers are safe and not accidentally summoning demons or on purpose summoning demons and getting themselves into a bit of a situation. And yeah, we basically follow a year in her life as she is teaching her upper 6th class, as there is a bit of an event and how things kind of fall out after that. And some things actually happen in her personal life as well, so that's also part of what's going on. I really enjoyed this. As you can understand from that entire spiel, this book is incredibly English. It's incredibly about school, and it's incredibly also about private school in a real way. We start off this book and Walden is called to the staff room because like demons, they live in a different realm, they want to come into the human realm, and they want to possess things that are complicated systems. So like obviously person number 1, but number 2 is like any kind of like technology, phones, etc. So we follow Walden and she's called in the staff room to try and deal with the imp that lives in the staff photocopier, who is gone on strike, and she manages to convince it to go back to work by offering it a chocolate digestive biscuit. So like, we're very English here. I do think that one of the real strong suits of this book is like Walden's character and the narrative voice that she has, as you can tell from that little story, but like that vibe is continued throughout this entire book. I really enjoyed that Walden is like a slightly older character to what we tend to normally have. I really enjoyed the conversations that this book was having around teaching, around school. We do have conversations about kind of class and how that relates to, you know, what school you're able to go to, especially kind of within a UK setting. It is very like real to the experience that I grew up with, you know, going to a bog standard state school in the UK. I will also mention, just like as a little heads up, this book is often referred to as sapphic, which it definitely is, but Walden is bi, and so while she does have like a romance and a flirtation with the head marshals, which are like the magic police who work at the school as well as other places, who is a woman, so there is definitely like a, you know, a lesbian relationship in there. Walden also ends up having like another romance and flirtation with a guy because she is bisexual. That was something that was gonna put you off. I just wanted to let people know because I wasn't expecting it. And then yeah, plot-wise I would also describe this a bit more like slice of life than how like a traditional book works. We do have like, you know, we get an introduction, we do have a bit of a climax that could act like an inciting incident for most other stories, but then I feel like the pace then also like slows down a little bit post that, and we are really dealing with the intricacies and minutiae of running a school and teaching classes and kind of the fallout of that inciting incident. Until we get to the end of the book and where we have some of the resolutions both for various characters and also a bit more of a big action scene as well at the end of the book. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a really fun time. Again, because I did enjoy the narrative voice and I enjoy having conversations around teaching, especially as someone who, when I was in my mid-teens, my mother went back to university to become a teacher. It's something that I feel like I know a little bit about, and so it's always interesting to read about stuff where you're getting a lot of information about how this job works, kind of thing. But yeah, I overall had a good time. I did have a couple of qualms about how this story kind of wrapped up in the end. I feel like some bits were a little bit quick. I had a great time. I do think this is a book that's not going to work for everyone, but it definitely worked for me, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. The next book that I ended up reading and picking up was Sorcery and Small Magics by Maiga Doocey. This is a gay fantasy romance book. We're following our 2 main characters, Leovander Leo Loveage and Sebastian Grimm. They both go to this magical school. They're in their last year. Leo is not a very good student, and he's one mistake from being kicked out of school kind of situation. He is very much a bit of a class clown, likes playing pranks on people, especially on Grimm, and which much rather be out playing his violin and kind of almost getting a little bit drunk. Whereas Grimm is very goody two-shoes, wants to do quite quiet, quite serious, wants to do well at school to get a job to then elevate both his and his family's social standing, whereas Leo is pretty set in those regards. One of the things about Leo as well is that he does not want to cast large magics due to having bad experiences with those in the past, so he mainly focuses on small magic as well, which is another reason why he just does not want to excel at school, because then the next step is him being recruited, and he has this expectation that they're going to ask him to do these big magics that he doesn't want to do. So yeah, what happens when they're paired up in a class, which hasn't happened since they were in first year and everyone realised that they got on each other's nerves, and they accidentally cast a spell that makes Leo follow all of Grimm's commands if he asks him to do something. Not good. A bit of an illegal forbidden spell to also be done, so they are trying to keep this hidden so that they can fix this problem without anyone knowing. So they end up having to go on this romp into the magical woods that are on the outskirts of their country to try and find a mage who can perform a counterspell for them, and in the process get a little bit closer and things like that. This was really fun. This was really cute. I had a great time reading this. I think the main thing that is making me absolutely insane about this book is that we have not resolved the romance between these 2 characters at the end of this book, which again, the yearning and the stuff that's going on in here makes me feel insane and is great. Otherwise, it's not really doing anything new, but it was a really fun time. I did really enjoy the magic system that's set up in this book. You basically have people who are able to write spells but can't really cast them, and then you have people who can cast spells but can't really write them. And obviously in this situation, Leo is a person who can write spells, whereas Grimm is someone who can cast spells, hence why they're being made to work together. I felt like that was a really good setup for making these characters have to work together and interact, and overall it was really fun. I definitely want to pick up the next book when it comes out, partially because, again, like I mentioned, the romance is not resolved and it's killing me slightly. Overall, I did give this 4 stars. I do think just because of the level of yearning that was going on, I enjoy, to be fair, I do enjoy a romance that takes a couple of books to develop. The next book, the last book that I ended up picking up in November, was This Is How You Lose a Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. I borrowed this book off my friend who very kindly was just yeah, you can take it off my shelf whenever. But yeah, this is a little sci-fi. Yeah, it's a sci-fi novella. We're following our two main characters, Blue and Red, who are agents in rival agencies who basically send their agents back in time to try and affect various paths through various, worlds, basically, universes, to try and tweak events so that their version of the future wins. So what happens when Red and Blue start sending each other letters through these various moments in time, and a relationship forms between the two. This was just so good. I loved the writing in this. I did think that all of the, it's mainly set up as, scene following one of these characters and then letter between these characters and kind of back and forth between the two characters. I felt like both the scenes were really good. It was always really fun to kind of work out kind of what was going on and finding out a bit more. You're very much drip-fed information throughout this book about who these characters are, what their agencies are, and kind of things like that. Very sci-fi elements to both of these people as people. And then the kind of letters between them, which were absolutely gorgeous, insanely romantic. And yeah, just really good. It was one of those situations where you're reading a book that everyone's like, oh, this is fantastic, and then you read it and you're like, yeah, absolutely, yeah, actually everyone who was telling you that was correct, and I have been changed. Screaming, crying, throwing up, sobbed my way through the last bit of this book. It was genuinely really good, really beautiful writing. There's one of the letters where there's a PS, and it goes, I write to you in stings red, but this is me, the truth of me, as I do so, broken open by the act, in the palm of your hand, dying. I feel insane. I don't know how to explain it. Screaming, crying, throwing up. This was fantastic. I gave this 5 stars. It's great. It was a great time. It's also very short, which is why I was able to read 9 books this month. That is everything that I read. Overall, I do think a lot of these books were 3 stars, but I overall was having a good time. There was nothing that I was like, this is bad, which I guess is a positive from last month. Of what I'm reading next, I am listening to the audiobook for Silver and Hemlock, and I've also started the Goldfinch. That was everything that I read in the month of November. I hope that you're also having a good time this month and that you've read some good books. Bye!